everybody. Welcome to our talk, Making a Game with Friends, a Survivor's Guide. We're going to tell you a little bit of our own experience making a game together, some of the things that we learned, some of the good things we learned, some of the pitfalls we encountered and how we came across those, so that whenever you guys want to build a game and you want to build it with friends or colleagues, you can learn from our experiences as well. So, who are we?
I'm Jacob Eddy.
And I'm Zachary Reyes, and we're senior computer scientists here at the University of Tulsa. But more than that, we love to play video games, we love to make video games. They're just like a passion project of ours. So what were we doing? This was a class that we were actually taking in our junior year in college. We were taking a class called Game Level Design, and the goal of that class was to make a game community with a small team. It's one semester-long project. And basically what we were supposed to do is move on from just building smaller projects into more of like a production style game development. So why were we doing this? Why were we taking this class? Because Jacob and I are actually just regular CS. We're not part of the University of Tulsa's CSGC development, or CSG development and design tracks. The reason why we wanted to do it though was because making video games is fun. It actually really is. We enjoy it a lot. It's what we like to do in our spare time. And it also was going to be for strengthening our programming skills. Game development in particular is pretty tough at making sure that you know where everything's going. We're basically running a simulation that needs to happen in real time without, and being able to understand what's going to happen at certain points and being able to go, okay, well, if event A happens before event B, does that change anything? Thirdly, we were doing it because it was going to build our teamwork skills. As computer scientists, the software that we're building nowadays is too big for just one person to do it all by themselves. You need to be able to have good teamwork skills in order to work with other people, to be able to actually successfully build working and efficient software. Then it also filled out a necessary CS elective, and it also served as a creative outlet for us, giving us a way to move away from just like working in operating systems, code and stuff like that. Things that are very like dry and not very fun. Something a little bit more juicier. So the team, it was us two, a mutual friend, and then one random freshman. A very interesting team, to be certain. And it's one that's actually going to kind of pop up later on when we talk about what actually happened as part of this. So how did we plan? At the start of the project, we wanted to be able to at least start off on the right foot. That would be kind of bad if we tripped and fell on our faces right from the beginning. So what we did is we talked to everybody and established a series of strengths and weaknesses, like who was good more at the artistic direction stuff, who was better at 3D modeling, who was better at programming, or not necessarily better, but who had the most experience with programming. And then we worked together to brainstorm a game. We wanted to be able to come up with some type of game that we all like collaborated at least a little bit on to try to figure out what we would want to build as part of our semester-long project. And then after establishing these strengths and weaknesses, and then also looking at the type of game we wanted to make, we then had to assign a task, which was just basically going, okay, well, we need this part, we need this part, we need this component, and we're going to basically give these to each of you as appropriate due to what you told us about your strengths and weaknesses. And then the next step would be just to do said task and then get Game of the Year every year.
So to dive into a little bit more specific stuff here. After our first brainstorming session, we came up with the idea was Andromeda Trail. And that's sort of a combination of the game FTL and Oregon Trail. So our big hook, though, was taking both those 2D games, combining them, and then bringing them into a 3D space. So it just sounded like a cool idea to us, this sort of traversing across the galaxy in your own little spaceship and trying to survive. You get to walk around your spaceship, kind of upgrade it, maintain it. And then we still felt like we were lacking a big hook of mechanic. And so we came up with what we started to call the card point system, which is just sort of an upgrade and ship management system where different areas of your ship would have what we call hard points that you could go interact with, and that was where you would actually put this equipment on the ship, because we weren't competent enough game makers to be able to allow people to build their ship completely from scratch, but we wanted some sort of customization aspect in there. And so here you can see just a real quick mock-up of what the hardpoint system would let you do. You go up to this glowing cube on your ship, you interact with it, and then if you have the materials required, you're able to build a turret or something. And so we came up with some concept art, 3,000 hours in Microsoft Paint. That was the general idea of what we wanted, was you in your ship flying around, your turrets kind of automatically targeting enemies nearby, because we figured out pretty soon that it'd be very hard to have players be able to fly in a 3D space and also target weapons. So that was not something. So we decided pretty early on that weapons should do the targeting themselves and just attack the nearest enemy. But we didn't stop there. We, after talking and about a week into class, everyone was having a bunch of ideas of things we could add. So at one point we were thinking quest system sounded cool if you maybe encounter a random event and were asked to bring a package from point A to point B, something simple like that. Procedural scene generation, maybe the enemies don't spawn in the same place every time you play a similar scene. Randomization of the star map, so each time it's kind of like a roguelike or something where it's a little different each time. You just restart if you die. Non-linear gameplay, let's see. Yeah, we went pretty far into that. The enemy factions thing was something we tossed around for a little while about whether or not we should have like a reputation system. So certain systems would be non-aggressive if you were if you had maybe done a quest for their faction. But our big plan was to bring it to Harden, now referred to as CSGC. So this kind of sounds like No Man's Sky too, and that is some foreshadowing, I guess, but how did it go? Well, it didn't go well. And at least the first week or two of the post-brainstorm, we had to do a presentation for the class on what our game was, and right before the class, we'd all agreed to meet, and half of our team was missing, and so that's sort of just general college team project stuff, and then some other class-related stuff. But as far as actual working on the project itself, the answer we kept getting was too busy with classes, and I mean us included. It wasn't just our other two teammates, but it was something that we put off for a little while. I don't think. Most prototyping goals weren't met because our initial prototyping goals included a few things like turret model concepts. That one wasn't met. The movement script, which ended up being just a lot more complicated than we anticipated, moving through 3D space, but then also being able to get out of your ship and walk around and have gravity point in the right direction every time proved to be a little bit difficult, at least for amateur developers at that point. So. Slide. So as Heartland approached, we got a little bit closer, we decided that we needed to do a lot of cutbacks. Decided that redefining our scope was probably the best way to go. So things like the quest system, factions, all that was out the window. We really just wanted the minimum viable product. We wanted movement, we wanted a way for you to interact with your ship and place down turrets, and resources didn't necessarily need to be working, but that was kind of one of our goals. You'd be able to, we kind of defined our core gameplay loop as you go into a scene, you kill some enemies, you get some resources, and with those resources you then upgrade your ship and move on to the next scene and repeat ad nauseam. At least for years in Heartland. So. Less than 24 hours before Heartland, I believe this was on a Friday at 1 p.m., we all agreed to meet up and decided we really needed to get working on this thing. It's just about the only thing we had for the game at this point were models and basic movement script. So, because I've been taking over 3D modeling. Originally, 2 of us were supposed to do 3D modeling, 2 of us were supposed to do scripting. Zach was on the scripting side, I was more on the 3D modeling side, and what it turned into was all of the 3D modeling, and he did almost all of the scripting. But, yeah, so we all agreed to meet up. Zach on that? No. And then I believe we worked from about 1 p.m. the Friday before to about, well, actually, thankfully, Heartland that year ended up getting delayed an hour, so we worked an extra hour. And then 30 minutes beyond that extra hour into the actual conference. So I think we got done by 11:30 a.m. the next day.
So what did we end up bringing to Heartland after that huge death crunch? The big things that we had, well, we didn't have this picture, it didn't look that nice, but we did have 3D ship movement, and we also had first-person movement inside the ship. This was actually kind of a big deal, because during that time, we were trying to get it so the ship could rotate around it. And any time you stopped it and you wanted to explore your ship in a first-person view, we had to get gravity facing the correct direction, all of orientation facing the right way. And that would prove to be a lot trickier than we expected. We also had hard points working, both internal and external. So the external hard points were more for attacking and mining. So you would have a hard point for a mining module that would shoot out like a little laser at a meteorite and then be able to extract the resources from it. And then the internal ones were more for ship upgrades, like added defense or added health, increased speed, increased turning speed, and stuff like that. And so we had all of these different components. We had the asteroid mining. We had basically like the core gameplay stuff. It wasn't very pretty, but we at least had it. We also had put out 5 different scenes, so 5 different scenarios. I think the last one was actually just like an enemy scene. Yeah, we needed our demo to like end at some point, so we had the players go through all 5 scenes, and then at the end it was just an endless wave of enemies because we needed to kill them so that they could move on. And so feedback that we got from Heartland, the game was too buggy, and this was the result of, when you're writing code at the last minute, doesn't end up being your best work, as it turns out. The game was also too dark. Some of our lighting situations were just made it where it was just like, you would be able to kind of see, but only in very specific locations. The lighting was what was really weird, especially inside the ship. We also needed to add a tutorial because in our case what was going on was that we were just manning the booths. And at these booths we were just basically telling the players how to play the game. But if you actually have a production style game, you need to be able to have a game tell the people how to play it, because you're not always going to be there to explain it to them. But other than that, we were on the right track. We had a good starting point. We finally had something that was a result of some work. It wasn't just like a couple stagnant pieces that hadn't been merged together. We had started merging it together into an actual thing. So we had a new attitude following Heartland. Our big thing was to work on the project much more regularly and communicate more frequently. We realized that a lot of our problems resulted from not talking so much. And part of this is that there's only so much you can do. You can reach out to somebody as much as you can, and then they never respond. There's not much you can do about it. But for the people who were working, sometimes they didn't necessarily know what the other person was doing. So we need to be able to constantly have this momentum, this energy going with our project, so that it wouldn't stagnate and become this thing that people only looked at occasionally, and they'd be like, oh, go to a meeting and be like, yes, we should do this, and somebody else goes, yes, we should, let's do it next week, and then nothing happens. So we need to work together more as a group, and we need to be more flexible with our responsibilities. It kind of moved away from the hard, like, I will only work on scripting, and you will only work on the 3D modeling. It became more of a, this is what I'm good at, and I'll do it. But if there's something else that needs to be done, it doesn't matter who does it. It still needs to get done. That job still needs to be finished. We also worked at scaling back the project. We had gone too far with our ideas. We brainstormed too much, and we needed to cut unnecessary features that were going to cause problems and basically be unreachable with our new lower scale team of 2 people. And above all, we wanted to avoid the death crunch. Because believe it or not, it's not fun staying up all night to try to get a project done, fueled off of Zaxby's chicken.
Which leads us to Death Crunch 2. Right before finals, we had we had consistently worked on the project, but it was mostly minor improvements, bug fixing and stuff, and we realized to get the rest of the game implemented, it was going to take another day. So we set the goals for this one as finding the hardpoint system, so increasing the total number of stuff. I believe the Heartland version had 3 different things you could put into the weapon slot, and then maybe like 2 different you could put into the upgrade slot. So since we had that system already mostly working and most of the bugs fixed, because looking back at your code from written at like 3 a.m., you realize a lot of things that you messed up and are easy fixes, but we just couldn't fix at that point. So I think we bumped this up to, we wanted to have just as many turrets and passive modules as we could. We wanted to also add to that as the, because I didn't want to just have you access it and then you see the full list of everything you could possibly build. We wanted to kind of structure it as a tree. So you start off with a couple of base modules, and then let's say you build a cannon. Then if you access that again, you can build the cannon Mark II, and then that branches out. So Zach designed this pretty neat branching tree structure that allowed us to kind of drop in, like, all right, we want this prefab to be the second upgrade for this prefab. And so we did that. We wanted multiple different resource types, because our first one was, I think it was just called mining or something, and then you got that for everything, killing enemies, mining asteroids. So we split it up to have like 4 different, there was just like credits and iron, gold, and silicon. So each one kind of played into a different type of turret, so you can prioritize one or the other. We wanted, let's see, our initial scenes, we had, I believe that was, it was just once you killed all the enemies, you switched to the next scene after you pressed a button. So we wanted the actual star map we had initially envisioned. That was one of a couple things that we had brainstormed after we decided factions and quests could go, but that star map idea of having the randomized points that allow you to kind of reach the end was always very cool to us. So, and then a couple other things, and some shops so you can trade currencies, and an actual tutorial this time. Let's see. So our final results, we actually managed to get in all the features that we had listed. That was more or less working condition. Things ended up with an A in the project and the course, but finally we were able to get some sleep. I think, I don't remember how late you and one of our other teammates finally showed up for the final death crunch, and I think they were up to like 6 a.m.
It was 5 or 6.
5 or 6.
The poor guy had an exam the next day too.
Yeah, it was a rough time, but we did learn that some valuable lessons about pacing your development cycle and stuff. A few other things.
So one of the key, or a lot of the key takeaways we have is just from working experience just with this project. So the big thing that we learned as far as teamwork goes is that you do need to play to your team's strengths. You're not always going to have an ideal situation where you can go from 0 to something just in a short amount of time. At the same time, you also need to be realistic about your skills. So it's real easy to just go, hey, hey friend, let's make a game. And then they're like, okay, I don't know very much about coding, but I'm willing to learn. And you think, all right, this will still work out. You do need to set aside like that friendliness aspect and be a little bit more like, okay, what do you know? What can we do? And are we both on the same level? Are we both on the same wavelength, thinking the same thing about this project? Do we both take it as seriously? Those types of things will really help towards making sure that you're getting actually see success. You can't force somebody, or you can't try to encourage somebody to do a project if they don't do it. And that was something that we kind of learned, because we had to figure out which one of us were actually really serious about this project. I wasn't good. The second thing was to work together in person and hold each other accountable. So one flaw that we fell into was the thing of like, oh, our schedules are too mismatched. Let's just send each other messages over like Slack or GroupMe. and that should be good enough because we're still talking to each other. That doesn't really work out at all. It's super helpful to actually meet in person and set aside time, even if your schedules are a little bit like mismatched, to try to find some type of common point where you guys can actually work together. Because if you don't do that, it's really easy to blow off those messages. But if you treat the meetings as big of a deal as you want the project to be, you'll get a project that's closer to the product that you actually want.
Okay. So this is another thing we learned kind of in our, earlier on we learned this, was that back when we were all brainstorming, because it was just a team of 4 different students, it was kind of, everyone had a different vision for the product, and so it kind of turned into 4 people all going different ways at once, which is not great because everyone wants to make their own thing. So at some point, you have to kind of realize, you have to kind of turn some creative freedom over and establish sort of a hierarchy. It's very hard to design a game if everyone has absolutely equal say. So we kind of picked a project like creative lead on our team who's be sort of the final say on what got implemented. And it was sort of a soft hierarchy, but it definitely ended up helping out because especially if you're working with friends, and especially if you're both working on a project you're interested in, as Zach and I were, it can be very difficult if you have 2 different people who have the exact same amount of creative say in the project, and a lot of time that can lead to sort of like, all right, well, I'm going to go make my version of this game, and sort of split up. And let's see, that kind of brings me to the second point. It's like designing by committee is sort of bad. That's kind of how we ended up with a couple of features that were, if we had tried to implement them, they would have been incredibly bloated because essentially everyone sat around the room and said, just kept adding to it, and eventually it just got to the point it's like, oh, we can't actually do this, but at the same time, you don't want to be closed off to its feedback. The final point was is to kind of, for the leader at least, and really anyone else who's like very creatively involved, to communicate your vision effectively. This is something I meant to touch on earlier, but it's not a big thing that we ran into early on in the development was that we were using sort of different vocabulary to define games. So, because Zach and I, when we both play video games, we maybe not play the same exact video games. So, I'd say, for example, the hardpoint system was one of those. I played some games where hardpoints are just a thing. That's just what you call them. And I don't think Zach, I didn't realize this at first, but he had no idea what I was talking about the whole time I was describing the system. So something we did that really helped out was we created a document that was essentially the Andromeda Trail Bible. Like it had for a dictionary, I guess. It kind of had the point of the game, everything from lore to like a full dictionary of terms. And this is what hardpoint means. This is what I think we had an active module, passive module, all these different terms that even though some of them may never face the public, even though we may never refer to that in the game, at least in the development side, we all need to be on the same page, and that is something that the design document really helped with.
Yep.
All right, so we learned a couple of things as far as our production goes. The first thing is to build a minimum viable model. You need to start off with something where you can kind of break down your game's code just to its DNA and then build it back up. What's the central idea around your game that's going to be kind of its hook? In our case, it was our hardpoint system. It's the most fun part of our game is being able to build a customized ship and going from the level 1 laser up to the level 3 laser and just seeing what that can do. You also need to set reachable goals within reasonable dates. As much as it's fun to think, oh, I can do these 3 things in a week or something like that, it is really important to kind of set conservative amounts where you're like, okay, well, I'd much rather be able to have like a couple of days extra time in case something happens, in case this task ends up being harder for you than I thought it would be. Better to have a little bit of that room, because at worst, you basically will just end up on time. And at best, you can get it done, and then you're basically a hero. You did it ahead of time. And then you also need to dream big, but still keep your real in your expectations and kind of cut things off. Basically, as William Faulkner put it, in writing, you must kill your darlings. You can't always be married to the ideas that you want in your game. We had a couple of ideas that I think, at least as far as I know, I was like kind of like, hey, let's put this in. But over time, I had to actually go, okay, you know what? Is that actually going to make the game more fun? Is it actually going to be something I can do in this amount of time? Is this the best way to spend my remaining time on this project?
All right, thank you for coming to our presentation. Do you guys have any questions? Yeah.
I noticed in one of your slides, you mentioned that you have no version control system in place. I'm assuming you made this with Unity?
We did. So that was prior to Heartland. We had no version control system in place. After Heartland, that was one of our takeaways. Was we realized we really needed to do that, so we started using Unity Collab.
Can you elaborate more on that? I'm not familiar. I'm assuming that's some sort of a VSC within Unity itself?
Yes, yes it is. So Unity Collab, they have a professional tier that's, I don't know how much it is, but they have this free tier. We found out that for up to 3 people, you can work on a project, add other people to the project, and then there's a button in the Unity editor that just says, push my changes. And so once you push your changes, everyone else gets something that says download changes, and it has conflict resolution, which is very useful because that was probably one of the biggest slowdowns, I think, of our pre-Heartland crunch, was just merging everything. So he'd work on stuff on his computer, I'd work on stuff on my computer, and then we'd have to merge and resolve all these different issues we were running into. And then towards the very end, because we didn't want to do that anymore, we were working on one machine, so he'd work for 30 minutes, I'd work for 30 minutes, he'd work for 30 minutes. But after that, we were able to sort of parallelize the process with the Unity Collab. That's yeah, it's just a service they offer.
It's real nice.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes. What is a hard point system? What do you mean by that?
Oh, sorry. So the hardpoint system was, let me find the slide. So the hardpoint system, that yellow block there would be a hardpoint on the ship. A hardpoint just refers to something where a place where you can attach something. That's basically the definition of a hardpoint. It's used in like aircraft terminology and stuff, and so that's so for the purposes of this game, a hardpoint was where you would attach a weapon, or an internal hardpoint would be where you attach like an internal module, something like, you know, extra ammo capacity or something. So we had little models for each of these, and so yeah, that's all the hardpoint system was.
Got a question?
Yes.
Regarding your 3D models, what did you use for texturing?
So because I was doing all the 3D models myself, I made the 3D models in Blender, but I was learning as I went along and did not spend the time to UV unwrap and stuff, and so I found out that Unity will let you drag materials on there, so we ended up doing, let me see if I can find, you can see that all the colors and all of the textures and stuff of the game are just basic Unity materials with different metallic hues and stuff. I have since learned a little bit more about UV unwrapping and texturing, but it was something that, because we were making all of our own art assets, we realized that doing a lot of texture work and stuff with a team of 2 people would have taken a lot more time, so we went very sort of low poly look with that. So that was just drag and drop Unity materials.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it playable anywhere, or are you going to get to show tomorrow? Or?
We actually didn't submit. We have an updated version. It's all your laptop couldn't play the.
I don't know.
It can.
It's-
My laptop can
I think
play
you
it, but we
click
don't
on
have an
spot.
HDMI cord. So if you are interested in seeing the game demo, I do have it.
Okay.
And if you want to see it, I can show you it. But
Yeah,
can't do it on the big screen, unfortunately.
Yeah, my computer doesn't run games very well.
Sorry.
It's,
But we did do some a bit of upgrade, updating and stuff. So
yeah. So anyone else?
yeah.
Going into the project, you guys already had a deadline, being that it was a class project. You knew the number of people you had and good approximate number of man hours per week. What sort of strategy or approach did you take for estimating how long components would take to develop, and what would be reasonable goals throughout the project? Obviously, as you said, that ended up failing, but I'm curious what sort of process you went through for determining that initially.
So our initial take on that, I believe, was, well, when we were dealing with the 4 people initially, it was sort of asking, hey, about how long do you think this would take? We would try and, it was more, hey, let's meet up this next week. What do you think you can get done in that time period? Rather than it was, we need this feature and we're going to set this timeline. So it was kind of, we set our deadlines before we set what we wanted to be in those deadlines, and just kind of talk with each other to figure out what was reasonable. Because we're all college students, it had to be a little flexible, because everyone has like, oh, well, this week I've got tests, or this week I've got a paper. And as you saw in the presentation, we ran into a little bit too much of that. I think when you get like a project that can be put on the back burner for college students, a lot of times it does get put on the back burner. So it's easy to say, oh, well, the deadline for this is in the future, and I've got a paper in 3 days, so I'm going to not work on this for the next week or two. But towards the end, when it was really more of just us working on the project, it's a little bit easier because it's just a 2-person team. It was more, hey, what are you going to be able to have done in this time frame before this date? What are you going to be able to have done? And so we each just kind of worked off of that. If that answers your question, I don't know if it does.
So it sounds like it was just working off of, I feel like this will take me X hours.
Yeah, at least.
You were into this.
And you were
Yeah.
off by a factor of how much?
Oh, initially quite a bit. Quite a bit. That was sort of we overestimated our ability at the beginning a bit. Towards the end, we got it a lot more refined. Like you saw, we had this much time, and we decided this many features need to be in there, and I mean, we were able to get all those in, so we didn't overestimate that much. But finals week and all that kind of came together to cause that second crunch. Because we were able to get, I think some of those features, some of these features we were able to get in before the final death crunch. I believe resources and multiple resource types were already working and stuff. I had personally undertaken the asteroid mining portion of that because I love that in any space game. But so not all of these were done at the final hours, but some of them were, because that's just how our schedules got based. Yes?
You said you had to cut several things and
Yes.
showed us. So what was your process, I guess, for deciding when and what to cut? And was there anything that you were like, this isn't really part of the minimum viable product, but we really want to, keep it?
Well, yes, there was. So yeah, our process for cutting was, a lot of that was looking at how the feature affected that core gameplay, which we had defined as basically kill enemy, get points, upgrade your ship. That was like the core, move on to the next scene, kill enemy, get points, upgrade your ship. And so some things that influenced that more than others were like upgrading, the ability to upgrade your ship better, because a lot of that was where essentially the big hook of the game was being able to upgrade your ship. So if you only had, let's say, 2 different options of what to put in slot, and like in any of these slots on the ship, was going to be a little bit more boring than if you had a lot of choice there. So when weighing a feature like that versus a feature like adding factions or a quest system, those were ones that we looked at and were like, well, can you still do all this stuff without, you know, having a quest, without having random events that kind of pop up and say, hey, I want you to bring this package to do this. That would just, a lot of it was sort of establishing how big of an impact it would have on the game if we were to cut it. And those features that didn't have a big enough payoff were the ones we cut. My personal feature that I clung to, partially because it was a pretty low bar to be able to actually implement it. It had similar gameplay, but sort of a different feel than systems we already had in there, was the asteroid mining. That was something that we already had targeting scripts in there to automatically target the nearest enemy, so I figured, well, one, I really want asteroid mining in there. Two, if I just redefine the tag for this script as target nearest asteroid instead of target nearest enemy, then we get the same thing. And so we can just, while you do damage to the asteroid, increase your points in this slider, and you have asteroid mining. Was there any feature that you
I wouldn't say there was like any major feature that I had like pushed for. I really like the first-person controller inside the ship, and that's actually what I did a lot of work on. Besides the getting the hard point system set up, where you can just specify a couple variables about each hard point and get it working right away. I would say that that was probably one of my favorite parts of the project, was getting the first-person controller working inside the ship. But like Jacob said, a lot of the things that we were just cutting were basically things that grew too far out from our game's DNA, from that core gameplay component, which was basically building up and building your ship.
And that's sort of the usefulness of doing that in the first place, of defining exactly what your game is supposed to be, what it's supposed to encapsulate. Because if you leave it as very nebulous, or just, you know, our game's going to encompass everything, then it becomes a lot harder to decide what to cut. But if you've got sort of a definition of like, oh, well, this is what our game's supposed to be, and this kind of falls more outside that circle than this feature does, so we'll cut that one. So it becomes a lot easier.
I had a question.
Yes?
What made you go with Unity instead of Unreal Engine or something else?
The class was taught in Unity. That was primarily it.
That's crazy.
A lot of, I think, TU's computer simulation and gaming department in general has moved over to Unity. We kind of got in at like the very beginning of that. So I think this was actually the first time that class was taught.
Yeah, it was the first. It was a new class.
So.
Anything else?
Are you guys from TU?
Yes.
Do you have like 2 or 3 things that when you finally got done and had everything turned into stuff, you said, if we had just done X, it would have greatly improved the process?
Yeah, that there were a couple features we were specifically at, I think part of it was when that hit the hardest, because we had just done like this big crunch and we're like, oh, there's some stuff that's not working. I had initially made 5 different, about 5 different enemy types that were all going to, act somewhat differently, or, well, act similarly, but they had like different models and did different damages and could shoot from different ranges and stuff. But I think I found out I had to cut them because just they weren't working. I wasn't sure why. And then, like, the day after, I looked back at the prefabs and noticed I had not tagged them as being enemies, and so that's why they were not being targeted. So a rookie mistake I look for every time now.
To be fair, it was like 5 a.m.
Yeah. These were, I think we actually cut them at the beginning of like the Heartland conference, because we had the presentation computer that was like, had sort of an outdated build, and then I had another computer I was like secretly working on so that we could transfer over the updated version before the judges came around. And we were able to do that, but at the last second we also found out that on the computer we were playing it on, the lighting, I think we had it like an intensity of 3, but we really needed an intensity of like 5 or 6 to be able to actually like see the game very well. And so that just kind of ruined everything. But yeah.
Entering into crunch time, you've admitted that it produces very buggy code.
Yes.
I could argue that it's almost not worth doing crunch time because the buggy code is, in my opinion, worse than not having the code built yet. From your experience with going through it, what are your thoughts now on if you were to be in that situation again, what would your approach be?
It depends on what kind of crunch, at least personally for me, it would depend on like what amount of crunch time we're talking about. Some, I mean, if you're looking at like some professional game studios that have to go through like a month of crunch time or something, at that point, I would definitely, if I was looking at, you know, a full week or longer or something of crunch time, I would definitely say try and move the deadline later or something, you know, postpone whatever you can, because it's not worth going through that for that amount of time. But for us, because it was really like in 1 day increments, it wasn't too bad to go back and look through and say, oh, okay, well, this is where the code wasn't working or something. So the pros definitely still outweighed the cons. Like, I don't think, I mean, without those two crunch times, we wouldn't have gotten, well, we wouldn't have made Heartland at all, and then we might not have made the final deadline, and I'm sure we would have still had a very basic game, but it wouldn't have been anything near what we were trying to submit. So for us, the crunch time ended up working out, but again, the length and the amount of stuff you're trying to do, and honestly the team size, so the amount of code you're actually going to be writing in that time, I think, is the biggest factor for me. So if we had a team of 10 people who were all going through that crunch time simultaneously, it'd be a mess to try and untangle and figure out whose bug was causing what. But just 2 people working overnight.
Plus, we were looking at each other's code as well.
Yeah.
So it would be, we were both working on like one computer, so it'd be like, Zach, what's wrong? And it'd be like, oh, Jacob, what's wrong? You know, we'd be like looking at the code, and basically we got a feel for what the other person was doing. And it worked in our case because it was just such a small team.
But in general, it's the big message, just avoid crunch time if at all possible, because it is, I mean, on a larger scale, not worth it at all.
It's not fun.
We have 2 GameStop gift cards to give out if anyone's going to be going to GameStop anytime soon. I don't know what process we're supposed to use to get these out. We're just going to hand these out. So
We're supposed to ask
questions. Yeah, really. And I believe you were the first one to ask a question. So if you would like a GameStop gift card, I don't know how much it's for. I don't know what this is. For you, second person to ask.
I'd be happy to accept it. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Before the wizard said he missed out. It's analog. Before the wizard said he missed out. Well, was that good questions? So thank you for all coming to our talk.